Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom, MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa, hello. So today's episode, Radar, I think because he's a bit more of a man now, gets a tattoo. So I wanted to talk to you about tattoos. I know you have a couple. Do you have any fun tattoo stories for us?
I do. So I think my most fun tattoo story is the story of my first tattoo. So in New Jersey, you can't get tattoos before you're 16 without parent permission. Like, even if you are 16, you need parent permission, but like no tattoos before the age of 16, right? So it was 3 days before my 16th birthday. And I really wanted this tattoo. And my mom was like, should I let my 16-year-old daughter get a tattoo for her birthday? I don't know. So my grandma was at my house celebrating my birthday with me. And my mom said, okay, well, if grandma gets the tattoo with us, because it was supposed to be like me and my mom, if grandma gets a tattoo with us, like, I'll let you get the tattoo. And my grandma was like, yeah, sure. Okay. And my mom was like, wait, really? So not only did my grandma agree to get the tattoo after like hating tattoos her entire life, just because like she came from that generation where like tattoos were strictly like for the military and biker gangs. She said yes to the tattoo, and the tattoo artist was just like, yeah, you're close enough to 16. So, okay. So my grandma got a tattoo, and I got technically an illegal tattoo as my first tattoo.
That's amazing. That is, I love that story. I love your grandma. She sounds like such a cool lady.
She was.
Obviously, for as long as I've known you, you've had that tattoo, and I've always loved that story that you got them all together as a family. That's a delight. I don't have any tattoos. I'm not against getting tattoos, but I just don't like needles, and there's nothing that I like enough to want on my body forever. But like, my sister's got a ton of tattoos, and my dad hates tattoos. One time we were watching TV, and there was a commercial for the show Ink Masters, I think on TNT, and during that commercial, when that came on, my dad was like, oh, that show's gonna be illegal in a couple of years, you just watch. Like, what are you talking about?
It's so funny, like the dad to hate tattoo pipeline. Because my sister is an artist, so she designs her own tattoos, and she wants to be a tattoo artist, and she has progressively gotten like larger tattoos in more conspicuous areas of her body, and every time she comes home with another one, my dad's like, ugh, why? I feel like it's such a dad thing.
Oh, it's definitely a dad thing. It is the most dad thing. Some dads have tattoos, and like, that's a very foreign concept to me.
Yeah, me too.
But anyway, let's get into this actual episode. So this episode was called Checkup, and as the name implies, it's about the Army mandated checkups that leads to Trapper finding out that he has an ulcer and potentially a ticket home. Vanessa, what do you think of this episode? It was kind of split into two distinct A and B storylines. So how do you think everything was like handled?
So I have mixed feelings, I guess, about this episode. I definitely didn't hate it. I enjoyed it, actually. But I think that there was like some aspects of it, like the checkup aspect, I know that we both think was kind of like creepy almost with some of the stuff that was handled. But the Trapper stuff was really fun and interesting to me. And I like the like little exploration into his character and kind of like knowing that he's leaving eventually. Seeing this almost like setup to him leaving was very interesting.
Yeah, I loved the relationship stuff between him and Hawkeye in this episode because you really get the sense that they like mean a lot to each other. And it's so like well handled without a lot of jokes or like anything about it. It's just kind of serious, like, oh, my friend is potentially leaving, and that kind of bums me out. But then the second half, or first half of it really, because the Trapper stuff doesn't come into play until the second half of the episode. The first half is mostly doing this checkup stuff. And there's some fun stuff with like Radar and everybody and Klinger. But what I think we both disliked was how they handled the checkups with the female nurses being examined by male doctors.
Yeah, I guess we'll get into the episode a little bit more, like with the checkups and stuff. I was trying not to take it too seriously because it was definitely played off for laughs. And knowing that a lot of the nurses are like both attracted to like Trapper and Hawkeye and Henry and stuff like that, I feel like kind of made it a little bit better. But when Margaret was talking to the nurses of just like, oh yeah, when the doctors are checking you out, they're not supposed to be, you know, making you uncomfortable. And I loved that aspect of it, of Margaret kind of just like making sure that the nurses knew that they weren't supposed to be uncomfortable by these doctors. And it was also played off very funny for laughs. Like, a lot of the stuff she was saying was like double entendre sexual stuff. So that was funny, but also like when Hawkeye was giving Margaret her physical, that was just like played super creepy for whatever reason. Like, he was so into like, oh, I'm gonna give Major Houlihan her physical. I was like, okay, calm down, Hawkeye.
Yeah, with Margaret telling these nurses that they have to feel comfortable, it is very MASH. Like, this feels very in line with, like, the humor of the movie, and potentially the novel. I have not read it yet. But this feels like the kind of joke that they would do, especially with the double entendres that she keeps saying, is very much that MASH kind of humor. And I'm not against, like, this in principle, but what usually works about MASH's kind of more sexual, dirty jokes between them is that there is a sense of, like, professionalism with the doctors and nurses. Like, when they're in doctor mode, they are very professional. And when they're off the clock and kind of want to have fun with each other. And the fact that these doctors would kind of, you know, cross the line during this professional time, I think is what doesn't work for me, more than the fact that they're, like, doing it in general. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's also just kind of like a creepy thing to be like, oh yeah, my doctor is going to, you know, be inappropriate with me, when that's like the last person who should ever be inappropriate with you. I don't know. And again, most of the nurses you know, have like dated Hawkeye and Trapper and stuff. So it's like, it's not, I guess, the biggest deal, but also just the fact that Margaret was like, okay, when I call your name, scream, so that I know whose like scream is whose if the doctors like do anything. I was like, oh, that's not good, but also was kind of funny, you know? So it was just like a very MASH 70s thing, you know what I mean? Not the best to hold up to in like today, you know? But it was MASH-esque.
And same with Margaret having a checkup by Hawkeye. I think what doesn't work there is because usually I like their flirty kind of relationship that they have, where they're kind of mutually like have this kind of weird vibe about each other when they're alone. But usually it's presented as more respectful towards each other. Like, I always feel like Hawkeye respects Margaret and her boundaries when he does this, even though he's very much trying to like push the boundaries. Usually it's like out of a sense of, I know that you can handle this, and like you kind of understand that I don't really mean it. I feel like it's more fun when there is that sense of respect. And this one, he is just kind of mean to her. It felt weird. I liked Margaret's rebuffing of him a lot, but Hawkeye's handling of this felt a little out of character to me, to be honest. He's usually pretty good about boundaries when he's doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. I do think this was in character for Hawkeye still, but in the worse end of the spectrum of his character, if you know what I mean. But I think that I do agree with you, where it is Margaret and Hawkeye's relationship almost, where he's always constantly like flirting with her to bother her because he knows that she's gonna get annoyed with it. Not that he thinks that anything's really gonna come of it by flirting with her and being like, hey, have sex with me, or whatever the case is. But he knows it annoys her, and that's just fun for him. So yeah, I like that aspect of their relationship a little bit more, and this just was weird. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but I also hated the fact that like they body shamed her in this episode. It was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, they call her fat and that her butt's too big. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She looks fine.
And like Loretta Swit is just, you know, the most fit actress, you know what I mean? She's like not fat at all. So this to me was just like, this was just so broke. Where it just felt like the writers were just like, hey, you know, women hate commenting about their weight. Let's make this comment about Margaret's weight. Haha, isn't that funny? She's insecure about it now. Like, in no world is she fat either, so it's just, like, so stupid.
Yeah, she, like, after Hawkeye says she could stand to lose 10 pounds and that her butt's too big, she, like, looks at herself in the mirror, like, alone, and she looks amazing. It's like,
yeah.
And then Frank comes in, and he tries to, like, you know, console her in a very frank way, where he was so kind of creepy about it, but it's so in line with, like, what Frank would say about, like, well, you're not fat, but also, like, you might be fat, but also, like, I like that, so it's fine. Like, the most frank kind of, don't worry about your body, because I find your body attractive, but also your body might be unattractive if you, like, eat a hamburger too much, you know?
And, like, honestly, so Frank says, oh, yeah, you're thin for somebody who weighs as much as you. And I'm like, this woman is in the whole army. Like, did nobody think, like, oh, maybe this woman's got, like, actual muscles? I don't know. It was just, like, such a dumb throwaway piece of it where it didn't really matter to the, like, overarching storyline at all. But it just made me so irritated because it's just like, you couldn't have thought of, like, something else to make Margaret angry about. It had to be like, oh, haha, women hate their weight, like, so we're gonna talk about her weight. It just felt so male humor in the 70s. I don't know. It was just, like, dumb.
Yeah, and one thing that I felt was pretty out of character for Margaret is that when Frank is describing, like, oh, I like your body, I like that soft and squishy and everything, and then he remarks, like, unlike a certain someone who used to cut me with her thin arms or whatever, Margaret had no comment on that. Like, she was like, oh, Frank, you lovely little fool you are.
Yeah.
But, like, bringing up his wife usually is like, hey, buddy, don't do that. So I thought it was weird she didn't, like, remark upon that at all.
Yeah, I guess maybe because he was saying that she was, like, better than his wife. I don't know. Just throw the whole scene away. Like, no thank you.
Before we move on from this, though, I have to remark that I thought when she blows into Hawkeye's stethoscope was very funny.
Yeah, that was probably the best aspect of this, like, checkup, am I fat scene. That was hysterical. I loved that. Is there any other scene from the whole, like, checkup bit that stood out to you as really funny?
So outside of the Margaret aspect, I really love Klinger trying to fake a medical illness so he can leave the army. Like, he finds out some guy has scoliosis, and they don't even say that he's, like, leaving the army because of it. But in, like, the next scene, Klinger comes in with, like, a faked x-ray of scoliosis, and I was like, that is very on brand for Mr. Klinger. And then, of course, there's the whole bit of Henry giving Radar a checkup, and, you know, Radar's just such a little boy, but he has this tattoo now, and he's like, hello, I can make a dance. And, like, that's just such a weird bit. I loved it.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about, like, a little bit about the tattoo. Yeah, Radar had this tattoo, and it was on discount, and I thought that was also hysterical, because it was an anchor, and Henry even says, he's like, you're not in the Navy. He's like, yeah, but, like, the Red Army Cross cost $1.25 or whatever it was. This only cost 50 cents, and that was the better deal.
I love that Radar's, like, trying to be a bit of a manly man now. That he's like, I'm gonna get a tattoo, I'm gonna be a cool guy. But he's also, like, doing it like it means nothing. Like, he gets a anchor for no good reason. He's just like, well, it was on sale, and it'll be on my body forever.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and Henry's probably right that was the way he got it was probably very unsanitary. I don't think that they cleaned things back then with like needles and stuff. No.
And just the making it dance is, like, really funny visually. Just the fact that they sit there for, like, 10 seconds doing it was pretty good.
And Henry was so into it too. He was like, can you make it go up and down or whatever it was? And Radar's like, no, not yet.
Okay. So going from that, let's talk about the much better half of this episode with Mr. Trapper having an ulcer and thinking he's going home. I thought that was so well handled and so interesting to me and really played into the dramedy aspect of the show like really well. That this was kind of half checkup comedy, even though that didn't really work for us, and half legitimate character study drama about Hawkeye and Trapper kind of dealing with the fact that they're going to lose each other. I thought it like worked really well, and I enjoyed pretty much everything about this half of the episode.
Yeah, me too. I really liked the so the whole plot of it is Trapper originally doesn't want anyone to like give him his checkup, I guess to like stop people from knowing he has an ulcer. And I just have to note that this scene where Frank is saying, "Hey, I'm here to give you your checkup," was so well done to me, because just like every line in that exchange was really funny, and it just moved the scene along so well. I really liked that. Just like one bit of that one scene really struck me for some reason, and I know that's not like groundbreaking or anything to be like, oh, they used comedy to move the scene forward, but it struck me as so well structured in that one bit.
Yeah, I liked how angry Trapper was at all of this situation. That he was very aggressive, like, please just leave me alone. And, at first you don't really know why. Like, what is going on with Trapper? Like, why is he so upset? And I thought it was a bigger deal than an ulcer. Not that an ulcer isn't a big deal, but I thought, like, they were going to examine him and there was going to be something wrong with him. And then it turns into, oh, well, you have an ulcer, you can go home. So it turns this negative into like a positive and a really fun shift that I didn't see coming. Because even before Frank examines or wants to examine Trapper, Hawkeye leaves the tent and like in secrecy Trapper like takes out this bottle of antacid and drinks it, and like it's so dramatically like framed that you're like, oh my god, what's happening? And then the way it all works out, you're like, okay, cool. Things are cool. He's going home.
Speaking of the going home aspect of it, I think that we both know that Trapper, leaves the show, and it's not really a spoiler for anyone who's listening. But to have this whole bit of Trapper potentially going home was such just a strange thing to have in the middle of the season. And I feel like this would have been such a better way for Trapper to have left the show, like, because it really felt like a farewell, like a goodbye. And yeah, I don't know, it was just very strange to have this written at this time.
Yes, I can attest to that. So for anybody listening to the show, I have seen through season 3. I've seen the finale of season 3 and nothing else. So I know the broad strokes of the remainder of the show, like who leaves, who stays, and kind of their resolution as characters, but I don't know the details. So watching this episode, there was a part of me, more so than I think other people had, that was like, oh, is this the one where Trapper does leave? Because I wasn't sure if he leaves in the middle or if it's in like a straight up season 4. I didn't remember that much about season 3 to remember if this is what happens. So the entire episode I was kind of in this like Schrodinger's cat situation with him leaving, of it being like potentially actually happening or just being kind of the one-off conflict for the episode. And the way it like resolved, I was so disappointed for Trapper, honestly. It felt like such a good conclusion for him. Hawkeye and Trapper do say their goodbyes. It was so disappointing in the way that, like, I guess this would be in real life when you're not actually leaving the army base you don't want to be on.
Speaking of that, too, of Trapper and Hawkeye saying goodbye, it felt so... Well, first of all, the acting was amazing from these two. Like, it really felt like they were saying goodbye to each other because they were getting, like, kind of misty-eyed and they were being very sentimental. And Trapper, like, kind of threw out a joke, like, hey, if I'm ever by here, if I ever come through these parts again, leave a bedpan open for me, or whatever the case was. It felt very real of how these characters would actually say goodbye to each other. And I won't spoil it for you, but I think that most of our listeners will, like, know how Trapper leaves the show. And I'm just wondering if that's why he left the show the way he did. Like, they said a lot of their goodbyes already in this portion of this season. So I'm wondering if that's, like, kind of the reason that Trapper left in that way. But I did think it was really sweet how Trapper was very excited to see his wife and kids. Like, he was like, oh, yay, my girls. I thought that was really sweet.
I know, and Hawkeye makes the joke that like, oh, they might be shaving now. Just a great way to cut that kind of tension. Like we said before, I love those kind of jokes where it feels so in character of like, we're going to make light of this emotional situation. I'm going to say that your daughters are shaving now. Very much is like what a real person would say.
Yeah.
But I have to say, what I like about this show, because this show goes on for a very long time and has a lot of cast changes throughout it, or maybe just the one or two big ones. But one thing that I like about the show and how they can handle cast members leaving is that more than a lot of sitcoms, this is a show where people don't want to be on the show that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Or the characters.
It's kind of built into the DNA that people can leave and people can be replaced, and like that's fine. It's not like somebody on Friends leaves and they get like a new friend. Like it is a professional kind of situation where you do have to deal with the fact that like people aren't going to be around forever. And I think that's why it works when other people come in. I mean, I haven't seen that far yet. So what are your thoughts on that? How they kind of switch out these characters over time?
Yeah, I think that's the, like, of cast changes in shows and in sitcoms and whatnot, especially during this time period. This was probably the show that did it the most naturally because, like you said, it was very much like, hey, we're gonna go home eventually and we don't want to be here. So it's this really, like, bittersweet moment when characters on the show leave for exactly that reason. Like, you know that their character doesn't want to be there, but you also love them so much. And, you know, there's we'll get into it when there is a cast change, but there's some funny stories about like what happens with the cast changes too, of like the audience hating the new cast members. And I'm like, oh, so that's like a thing across generations on TV shows.
Oh man.
But I do agree with you. Like, it feels the most natural in this show to kind of have those cast switches.
Yeah, it's similar to another medical show, House, because House has like a giant cast change, like basically halfway through, and it works because they're just co-workers. They're allowed to leave the place that they don't want to work. So I think it's just interesting that the show goes on for so long with these kind of monumental changes, and people love the people who come in now that we're, you know, a good few decades removed from the initial, like, how dare they change the show that I like. I want to know how I will react to new characters, because I am watching this live. So who knows if I'll like Mr. Winchester or whatever.
Yeah, I'm excited for your thoughts on the new characters. But we come to find out also that Trapper is not leaving in this episode. This is not the goodbye farewell that we think it's going to be. And I also really liked that too. So Hawkeye and Henry, they want to throw Trapper this big rager going away party. Of course they do, you know, because that's like what they do. They want to celebrate their friendship that they have and also be happy for their friend who's going home and also, you know, kind of like mourn that loss as well. And I thought that this was really cool because Trapper finds out, you know, oh, they don't send you home for ulcers anymore. You know, you have to just like stay, have it fixed, and they'll like ship you somewhere else. Or stay in the MASH unit, have it treated here, and you can stay in this like hellhole. And he's like, okay, that one. So Radar gives him this news and he tells Radar, hey, like, don't say anything to anybody at the party. You know, I'll handle it. And I thought that it was really sweet and such like a testament to Trapper's character of just like kind of letting them have this like celebration because he knew it was kind of like more than him. This party was them kind of having hope that, you know, hey, we're all going to go home one day. Like, yeah, we're celebrating Trapper and we love Trapper and stuff like that, but this is going to be all of us at some point. And he let them have that moment for like longer instead of bursting their bubble. And I really liked that.
Yeah, I like that too. You describing it that way like makes it so much better, honestly. I was like, oh, right. This is like a really cool thing for him to be doing. I just thought the party was like funny. I enjoyed all the bits at the party. But you're right, it is kind of played as a nice, dramatically satisfying thing of them like wanting this because they want the hope of it. But I was also like, man, it's funny when Henry is like sloshed out of his mind.
Yeah, and like that was another thing too, is like why I liked the tail end of this episode so much, or like the B plot of this episode, because this party was just hysterical. Like Margaret flirting with Trapper and Trapper flirting back was so cute. I actually loved that a lot.
I love that too, because that is a callback to, I think, a season 1 episode, maybe the finale, where like drunkenly Margaret is like, I've always found you attractive, Trapper, in her Margaret way of saying that. And I love how that's like brought back, that she is just like quietly into Trapper the entire time he's there.
I know. And then she's like, yeah, I really liked you, and I would always like look at you and then pretend to be looking away, but now you're leaving and now I'm stuck with needle nose. And I'm really wondering if she meant Frank or Hawkeye in that moment.
Oh my god, you're right, because Mr. Hawkeye does have a bit of a prominent nose. I think they make fun of that sometimes. So, who knows? I like, by the way, when Frank is like, well, one of them is leaving. We're almost free. It won't be them anymore. It'll just be one. And I was like, oh, buddy, you don't know. You got another goofball coming your way.
We'll get to that as well. But that's really funny because that's definitely called back when the replacement for Trapper comes.
I can't wait. I'm so excited to see this new generation of MASH guys come in.
It's coming sooner than you think. But yeah, then after Hawkeye gives another speech of how he's going to really miss him and stuff like that, and how everyone's going to miss him, it felt, like I said, this felt so strange for Trapper not to be leaving, knowing that Trapper leaves eventually. You know what I mean? Very, very odd. I'm just wondering if, like, at some point they knew, like, oh, Wayne Rogers might be, like, leaving if he's, like, leaving mid-season or whatever the case was. And I'm just, yeah, it was weird to have this without him actually leave.
The pacing of this season in terms of like when episodes play is kind of strange to me. Like that OR episode is such like a season finale episode. I know we have a big season finale in this one, but that one felt so much like later season to me, that they're playing all these really kind of good episodes when they're trying to do the dramatic stuff so early is really strange. And like I said, me knowing the broad strokes, until Radar says that he has an ulcer, or that they don't send you home for ulcers anymore, I was fully kind of like, okay, this might be Trapper's last episode. So I agree with you. It is weird. Maybe it is more broadcast order versus written order, because they do air episodes out of how they're intended in the writer's room to play. I don't know if that is how it is on Hulu, but I know like in the original production, that is kind of like what happened.
That's the only thing that I can really think of. Like, oh, the writers, wrote this intended it for it to be later. And also, no, because like, I don't know, me like talking myself out of my own point. I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. When we get to it, you'll understand what I mean of like why this is very strange and why I can't really wrap my head around it. But it kind of ends just like very randomly, where I guess to treat ulcers you need to be on like 3 weeks of bed rest. I didn't know that. I'm really wondering if that's true or not.
Yeah, we're lucky because neither of us have had an ulcer before, as far as I'm aware. I don't know if you've had some ulcers.
No, certainly not a stomach ulcer. No, that's pretty dangerous, I think.
So we don't really know how they're treated, but I like this ending with Hawkeye treating him, and he wants to give Trapper a tranquilizer to like relax him, and Trapper's like, oh, those don't work, and Hawkeye like gives himself the tranquilizer and jokingly like collapses as if it instantly makes you unconscious. And the laugh that these two had was amazing. I love these two, just very good friends. It was such a good friendship episode for Hawkeye and Trapper, that they mean so much to each other, that like losing Trapper like affected Hawkeye even though it didn't happen yet. Just everything about this, and then this ending with them being like, I love you, buddy kind of vibes was so good. I loved it.
It was really sweet that Hawkeye like literally tossed himself off of Trapper's bed and onto the floor to make him laugh while he's in bed, with a sickness. I really liked that. Like you said, it was just like a sweet, genuine moment of true friendship. And I enjoyed that. And I thought that it couldn't have ended on a more like happy or positive note.
Mm-hmm. This episode's kind of frustrating because one half of it, I'm like, nah, that doesn't work at all. And the other half of it, I'm like, this is maybe one of the best episodes of the show. So it's like, it's hard to balance out, I wish it was one thing or the other.
Yeah, I think that this is, I feel like I could be wrong, but I feel like they don't do the A and B plot so much in the earlier seasons. And this is one of the not first, but one of the earlier like A and B plot lines of MASH, because I think that they kind of branch off and do that typical A and B sitcom aspect of it later on in the series. And this is the first one that I can really like remember off the top of my head. So yeah, I think that we're going to be seeing that a lot where we're like, oh, this A plot and this B plot was like good or bad or whatever the case is. Yeah. Just to let you know.
Oh man, that's kind of exciting though. I like this discussion. I like having these two distinct halves to talk about. But going from that, do you have any favorite lines from this episode?
I do. This wasn't like a huge comedy episode, but there were some really good ones. So when Frank is trying to give Trapper his checkup and Trapper is just like, absolutely not. Trapper goes, take a walk, Frank. And Frank goes, this is the army. And then Trapper pauses for a second. He goes, then take a hike. Loved that. And then in that same scene, Hawkeye is like, hey, like, what's going on here? And Frank goes, McIntyre is refusing to take his clothes off for me. And Hawkeye goes, well, not everybody can be Major Houlihan, Frank.
That was such a, like, I'm surprised. If they had a live studio audience there, they would absolutely go, ooh, at that moment. That was a burn. That was a burn right there.
What about you? What were your lines?
So I just really have one major one that I really laughed at. In the scene where Henry's giving Radar's checkup and he's taking off all his clothes, he's got like 4 layers on, and Henry's like, are you in there? And Radar goes, well, my parents never took off their clothes. They said skin was the devil's slipcover. Just amazing to me.
Is he wrong, though?
Cover your shame. It's the devil's slipcover. That's the name of my new metal band, by the way.
Devil's slipcover?
Yeah, it's just going to be like a couch with like plastic is going to be the t-shirt.
So I do have some trivia for us as well. There were no real like guest stars in this episode, so I did a research determining service members' ability to perform their duties and like when they're sent home. And to preface this is like more modern. I couldn't really find like what would qualify as a disability that would get you sent home from the army back in like the 50s. So this is for now, if anybody's interested. So
I'm interested, actually. This is right up my alley. This kind of niche thing.
This was new for me too. Like I did not know any of this, so this is pretty cool. So this is the criteria for determining a service member's ability to perform their duties. Whether the condition presents a medical risk to the health of the member or to the welfare of other members. Whether the medical condition imposes unreasonable requirements on the military to maintain or protect the member. What the established duties of the member are, and if they can perform them during the remainder of their service. Basically, any condition that interferes with the performance of the service member's duties that are in line with that member's office, grade, rank, or rating will be considered for referral for disability evaluation and possible medical discharge. So, for anyone who wants to know, that's it.
Can I tell you, as a kid, I learned about the draft, and I was, like, existentially freaked out of, like, oh, if there's another draft again, I don't want to get drafted into the army. That sounds scary. And my mom wasn't like, you're disabled, you're not going to get drafted, but she was, like, tried to say it, like, in a nice way where, like, they're not going to draft you. You have an exemption. And I was like, what do you mean? And it wasn't until like years later where I was like, oh, right. Like I could not be in the army if I wanted to. And that doesn't stop them from sending me phone calls about if I wanted to join the army every other week anyway. I always tell those guys that I'm disabled and they're always like, oh, okay, bye.
That's really, really funny. I didn't know that you literally thought that you were going to get drafted when you were younger.
I was scared of a lot of things, okay?
All right, so from Ethan's existential crisis at 10 years old about getting drafted, what was your martini rating for this episode?
You know, this martini rating is difficult because, like I said, one half of this is really good and kind of one of my favorite bits the show's done. And the other half is, like, fine at worst, or at best, you know? So I might have to go, like, 2.5. Like, it is, like, 50-50, I think.
Wow. Okay, so I said this was a 3. I'm surprised that I said, like, 3 or 3.5, because I don't know. I like the trapper aspect of it, but I'm surprised that you gave it so low. Like, usually I go lower. Wow.
I know. We're mixing it up this season.
I would definitely stick with 3. Like, it was, to me, this was better than just like your average episode, just like a little bit, but it was still like a pretty average episode. I just think of the ones that I gave like a 2.5 to, and I do think this was just like better structured than those. So yeah, I would go 3. 3 is good for me.
I might have to agree. You might have knocked me up half a point. I'm feeling a little bit more buzzed on this because you know, the parts that are strong are really strong.
Yeah.
And it's not like the parts that are bad are like horrific. Like there's nothing like horrible in this one. It's just kind of like, well, this is 70s women humor.
Yeah, definitely.
So, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob for your Balco for being our technical consultant, Vanessa's sister, Melissa, for our awesome cover art, and, of course, our listeners. Links to our music, social media, and contacts for the show are linked in the description, as always. And join us next week for Season 3, Episode 8, Life with Father. But until then, make your tattoo dance. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.